Okay, hi. So let us continue and hopefully finish reading Alice in Wonderland. Ah, that's why it was louder than before. Somehow my volume got turned up. But anyway, same deal as last time. And we will. Oh. And where are you going? Where are you going, huh? You gonna come over? Okay, hi. Hi. We're already having a kitty interruption. It's been 2 minutes. Hi. Okay, now that she is comfortable yet again, let's actually get this thing started. Hold on, why is this doing whatever this is doing? Okay. We're having a great start, but that's fine. Okay. Let's see who was under this. Testing 1, 2. Okay. Chapter 10. The Lobster Quadrille. The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and drew back one of the flapper across his drew back wait, hold it. And drew the back of one flapper across his eyes. He looked at Alice and tried to speak, but for a minute or two sobs choked his voice. Same as if he had a bone in his throat, said the Gryphon, and set to work shaking him and punching him in the back. At last the Mock Turtle recovered his voice, and with tears running down his cheeks, he went on again. You may not have lived much under the sea. I haven't, said Alice. And perhaps you were never even introduced to a lobster, Alice began to say. I've once tasted, but checked herself hastily, and said, No, never. So you can have no idea what a delightful thing a lobster quadrille is. No, indeed, said Alice. What sort of dance is it? Why, said the Gryphon, you first form into a line along the seashore. 2 lines, cried the Mock Turtle. Seals, turtles, salmon, and so on. Then when you've cleared all the jellyfish out of the way, That generally takes some time, interrupted the Gryphon. You advance twice, each with the lobster as a partner, cried the Gryphon. Of course, the Mock Turtle said, advance twice, and set to partners, change lobsters, and retire in the same order, continued the Gryphon. Then the Mock Turtle went on. You throw the lobsters, shouted the Gryphon with a bound into the air, as far up to the sea as you can. So just yeeting lobsters into the ocean. Swim after them, screamed the Gryphon. Turn a somersault in the sea, cried the Mock Turtle, capering wildly about. Change lobsters again, yelled the Griffin at the top of his voice. Back to the land again, and that's all the first figure, said the Mock Turtle, suddenly dropping his voice, and the two creatures, who had been, okay, bye, uh, and the two creatures who had been jumping about like mad things all this time sat down again very sadly and quietly and looked at Alice. It must be a very pretty dance, said Alice timidly. Would you like to see a little of it? Said the Mock Turtle. Very much indeed, said Alice. Come, let's try the first figure, said the Mock Turtle to the Griffin. We can do it without lobsters, you know. Which shall sing? Oh, you sing, said the Griffin. I've forgotten the words. So they began solemnly dancing round and round Alice, every now and then trending on her toes when they passed too close, and waving their forepaws to mark the time, while the Mock Turtle sang, this very slowly and sadly. Will you walk a little faster? Said a whitening to a snail. There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's treading on my tail. See how eagerly the lobsters and the turtles all advance. They're waiting on a shingle. Will you come and join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? You can really have no notion of how delightful it will be when they take up as they throw us with the lobsters out to sea. But the snail replied, too far, and gave the look askance. Said he thanked the whiting kindly, but would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not, would not, could not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not, would not, could not join the dance. What's the matter, how far we go? His scaly friend replied. There's another shore, you know, upon the other side, the further off from England, and the nearest to France. Then turn not pale, beloved snail, but come and join the dance. Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? Thank you. It's a very interesting dance to watch, said Alice, feeling glad that it was over at last. Same. And I do so like that curious song about the whitening. Oh, as to the whitening, the Mock Turtle, said the Mock Turtle. You've seen them, of course. Yes, I've often seen them at She checked herself hastily. I don't know where Din may be, said the Mock Turtle, but if you'd seen them so often, of course you'd know what they're like. I believe so, Alice replied thoughtfully. They have their tails in their mouths, and they're all over crumbs. You're wrong about the crumbs, said the Mock Turtle. Crumbs would all wash off in the sea. But they have their tails in their mouths. And the reason is, here the Mock Turtle yawned and shut his eyes. Tell her about the reason that it all is, he said to the Griffin. The reason is, said the Griffin, that they would go with the lobsters to the dance. So they got thrown out to sea. So they had to fall a long way. So they got their tails fast in their mouths so they could get them out again. That's all. Thank you, said Alice. It's very interesting. I never knew so much about a whitening before. I can tell you more than that if you like, said the Griffin. Do you want to know why it's called a whitening? I never thought about it. Why? It does the boots and shoes, the Griffin replied very solemnly. Alice was thoroughly puzzled. Does the boots and shoes? she replied in a wondering tone. Why, what are your shoes done with? Said the Gryphon. I mean, what makes them so shiny? Alice looked down at them and considered a little before she gave her answer. They're done with blackening, I believe. Boots and shoes under the sea, said the Gryphon, went on in a deep voice, are done with whitening. Now you know. And what are they made of? Alice asked in a tone of great curiosity. Soles and eels, of course. The Gryphon replied, rather impatiently. Any shrimp could have told you that. If I'd been the whitening, said Alice, whose thoughts were still running on the song, I'd have said to the porpoise, keep back, please. We don't want you with us. They were obliged to have him with them, said the Mock Turtle. No wise fish would go anywhere without a porpoise. Would it really? Wouldn't it really? Said Alice in a tone of great surprise. Of course not, said the Mock Turtle. Why, if a fish came to me and told me he was going on a journey, I should say, with what purpose? Don't you mean purpose? Said Alice. I mean what I say, said the Mock Turtle, replied, in an offended tone, and the Gryphon added, Come, let's hear some of your adventures. I could tell you my adventures from the beginning of this morning, Alice said a little timidly. But it's no use going back to yesterday, because I was a different person then. Explain it all, said the Mock Turtle. No, the adventures first, said the Gryphon in an impatient tone. Explanations take such a dreadful time. So Alice began telling them her adventures from the time when she first saw the White Rabbit. She was a little nervous about it, but just at first the two creatures got so close to her, one on each side, and they opened their eyes and mouths so very wide. But she gained courage and went on. Her listeners were perfectly quiet till she got to the part about her repeating, You were old Father William to the caterpillar, and the words were all coming out different, and then the Mock Turtle drew a long breath and said, That's very curious. It's all about as curious as it can be, said the Gryphon. It all came different, said the Mock Turtle, repeated thoroughly. I should like to hear her try and repeat something now. Tell her to begin. He looked at the Gryphon as though it had some kind of authority over Alice. Hi, Weedy. Okay, what all happened? Good to see you. Okay. Compliments. Okay. Hello. I have appreciated myself today. Oh, and you want... Yes, that's fair. I was in the middle of reading a chapter and going... Well, I'm glad to see that somebody showed up. Hello, Weedy. I'm actually going to take a sip, and then I will give you your compliments. Hey, Weedy. I think you're great. I think you are super sweet. And I was just making sure that the dictating thing wasn't going. But you are such a sweetheart. And I adore you. And I always want you to be happy. Because you're my friend. And I think you're really neat. Good. All right. You're welcome. I will tell you that as often as you need to hear it. Because, I want to make sure my friends are appreciated. Yeah, this is just part of the, oh yeah, my cat interruptions are just part of the book. Or it's like this is Weedy. This is my friend Weedy. They're a part of the story. Did you know about the self-insert chinchilla in Alice in Wonderland? Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay. Alright, where were we in life? Okay. Stand up and repeat. 'Tis the voice of the sluggard, said the Gryphon. Have the creatures order one about, and make one repeat lessons, thought Alice. I might just as well be at school at once. However, she got up and began to repeat it, but her head was so full of lobster quadrille that she hardly knew what she was saying, and the words came out very queer indeed. Squirrel? 'Tis the voice of a lobster, I'd heard him declare. You have baked me too brown. I must sugar my hair, as a duck with its eyelids. So he had with his nose. Trims his belt and his button, and turns out his toes. When the sands are all dry, he is gay as a lark, and will talk in contemptuous tones of the shark. But when the tide rises and the sharks are around, his voice is as timid as tremulous sound. Has a timid and tremulous sound. That's different from what I used to say when I was a child, said the Gryphon. Well, I never heard it before, said the Mock Turtle. But it sounds uncommon nonsense. Alice said nothing, and she sat down with her face in her hands, wondering if anything would ever happen in a natural way again. No. I should like to have it explained, said the Mock Turtle. Oh no! Good job, Internet. Yes, it's just the weedy OCD. And I should like to have it explained, said the Mock Turtle. She can't explain it, said the Gryphon hastily. Go on with the next verse. But what about his toes? The mock. Hold on. There we go. I should like to have it explained, said the Mock Turtle. She can't explain it, said the Gryphon hastily. Go on and with the next verse. But what about his toes? The Mock Turtle persisted. How could he turn them out with his nose, you know? It's the first position in dancing, Alice said, but she was dreadfully puzzled by the whole thing, and longed to change the subject. Go on with the next verse, the Gryphon repeated. It begins, I passed by his garden. Alice did not dare disobey, though she felt sure it would all come out wrong, and she went on in a trembling voice. I passed by his garden and marked with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took pie crust and gravy and meat, while the owl had the dish and its share of the treat. When the pie was all finished, the owl, as a boon, was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon. When the panther received a knife and a fork with a growl, and concluded the banquet by, What is the use of repeating all that stuff? Said the Mock Turtle, interrupted. If you don't explain it as you go on, if it's not, it is by far the most confusing thing I've ever heard. Yes, I think you'd better leave off, said the Gryphon, and Alice was only too glad to do so. Shall we try another figure of the lobster quadrille? The Gryphon went on. Or would you like the Mock Turtle to sing you another song? Oh, a song, please, if the Mock Turtle would be so kind, Alice replied. so eagerly that the Griffin said in a rather offended tone. No accounting for taste. Sing her turtle soup, would you, old fellow? The Mock Turtle sighed deeply, and began in a voice choked with sobs to sing this. This is the song of Marshy's people. Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot tureen. Who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, who cares for fish, game, or any other dish? Who would not give all else for 2 penny worth of beautiful soup? Penny worth of beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup in the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup. Chorus again, cried the Gryphon, and the Mock Turtle had just begun to repeat it, when a cry of, "The trial's beginning!" was heard in the distance. "Come on!" cried the Gryphon, and taking Alice by the hand, it hurried off, without waiting for the end of the song. "What trial is it?" Alice panted as she ran, but the Gryphon only answered, "Come on!" and ran faster. And while more and more faintly carried the breeze that followed them were the melancholy words, "Soup of the evening, beautiful soup." All right, gonna take a sip. I'm glad you're being cozy. That makes me happy. It's a lot easier to be sillier with friends. Chapter 11. Who Stole the Tarts? The King and Queen of Hearts were seated on their throne when they arrived, with a great crowd assembled about them. All sorts of little birds and beasts, as well as the whole pack of cards. The knave was standing before them in chains, with a soldier on each side to guard him. And near the king was the white rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand, and a scroll of parchment in the other. In the very middle of the court was a table, with a large dish of tarts upon it. They looked so good that it made Alice quite hungry to look at them. I wish they'd get the trial done, she thought, and hand round the refreshments. But there seemed to be no chance of this, so she began looking at everything about her to pass away the time. Alice had never been in a court of justice before, but she had read about them in books, and she was quite pleased to find that she knew the name of nearly everything there. "That's the judge," she said to herself, "because of his great wig." The judge, by the way, was the king, and he wore his crown over the wig. Look at the front piece if you want to see how he did it. I have no idea what that means. He did not look at all comfortable, but it was certainly not becoming. "And that's the jury box," thought Alice. "And those 12 creatures," she was obliged to say creatures, you see, because some of them were animals and some were birds. "I suppose they are the jurors." She said the last word 2 or 3 times over to herself, being rather proud of it, for she thought, and rightfully too, that very few little girls of her age knew the meaning of it at all. However, jurymen would have done just as well. The 12 jurors were all writing very busily on slates. "What are they doing?" Alice whispered to the Griffin. "They can't have anything to put down yet before the trial's begun." "They're putting down their names," said the Griffin. The Griffin whispered in reply, "for fear they should forget them before the end of the trial." "Stupid things," Alice began in a loud, indignant voice, but she stopped herself hastily, for the white rabbit cried out, "Silence in the court!" And the king put on his spectacles and looked anxiously round to make out who was talking. Alice could see, as well, as if she was looking over their shoulders, that all the jurors were writing down "stupid things" on their slates. And she could even make out that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid, and he had to ask his neighbor to tell him. A nice muddle their slates will be in before the trial's over, thought Alice. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. This, of course, Alice could not stand, and she went round to the corner to get behind him, and very soon found an opportunity to take it away. She did it so quickly that the poor little juror, it was Bill the Lizard, could not make out what had become of it. So, after hunting all about for it, he was obliged to write with one finger for the rest of the day, and this was of so very little use that it left no mark on the slate. "Herald, read the accusation," said the king. On this, the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts of trumpet, and then unrolled the parchment scroll and read as follows. "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer's day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts, and took them all away." So, fun fact. There is actually a much longer version of this poem that goes into all the different kings of the different suits of cards. Kings and queens of the different suits of cards. But that is the most famous verse, but it is a much longer poem. "Consider your verdict," the king said to the jury. "Not yet, not yet," said the rabbit. The rabbit hastily interrupted. "There's a great deal to come before that." "Call the first witness," said the king, and the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts of the trumpet and called out, "First witness!" The first witness was the Hatter. He came with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. "I beg your pardon, your majesty," he began, "for bringing these in, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for." "You ought to have finished," said the king. "When did you begin?" The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who was followed into the court arm in arm with the Dormouse. 14th of March, I think it was," he said. 15th, said the March Hare. 16th, said the Dormouse. "Write that down," the king said to the jury, and the jury eagerly wrote down all 3 dates on their slates, and then added them up and reduced them to answer to shilling and pence. "Take off your hat," said the king to the Hatter. "It's not mine," said the Hatter. "Stolen?" the king explained, turning to the jury, who instantly made a memorandum to the fact. "I keep them to sell," the Hatter added in explanation. "I've none of my own. I'm a Hatter." Here the queen put on her spectacles and began staring at the Hatter, who turned pale and fidgeted. "Give your evidence," said the king, "and don't be nervous, or I'll have you executed on the spot." This did not seem to encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting one foot from the other and looking uneasily at the queen, and in his confusion, he made a large piece out of the teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just at that moment, Alice felt a very curious sensation which puzzled her a good deal until she made out what it was. She was beginning to grow larger again, and she thought at first she would get up and leave the court, but on second thought, she decided to remain where she was, as long as there was room for her. "I wish you wouldn't squeeze so," said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "I can't help it," Alice said very meekly. "I'm growing." You've no right to grow here, said the Dormouse. Don't talk nonsense, Alice said more boldly. You know, you're growing too. Yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace, said the Dormouse. Not in this ridiculous fashion. And he got up very sulkily and crossed over to the other side of the court. All this time, when the Queen had never left off staring at the Hatter, and just as the Dormouse had crossed the court, she called to one of the officers of the court, "Bring me the first list of singers at the last concert," on which the wretched Hatter trembled so that he shook off both of his shoes. "Give your evidence," the king repeated angrily, "or I'll have you executed, whether you're nervous or not." "I'm a poor man, your majesty," the Hatter began, in a trembling voice. "If I hadn't begun my tea, not about a week or so, and what with the bread and butter getting so thin, and the twinkling of the tea—" "The twinkling of what?" said the king. "It began with the tea," the Hatter replied. "Of course twinkling begins with a tea," said the king sharply. "Do you take me for a dunce? Go on." "I'm a poor man," the Hatter went on, "and most things twinkled after that. Only the March Hare said—" "I didn't," the March Hare interrupted in a great hurry. "You did," said the Hatter. "I deny it," said the March Hare. "He denies it," said the king. "Leave out that part." "Well, at any rate, the Dormouse said," the Hatter went on, looking anxiously round to see if he would deny it too. But the Dormouse denied nothing, being fast asleep. After that, continued the Hatter, "I cut some more bread and butter." "But what did the Dormouse say?" one of the jury asked. "I can't remember," said the Hatter. "You must remember," remarked the king, "or I'll have you executed." The miserable Hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter, and went down on one knee. "I'm a poor man, your majesty," he began. "You are a very poor speaker," said the king. Here one of the guinea pigs cheered, and was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court, as this was a rather hard word. I will explain to you how it was done. There had been a large canvas bag, which was tied up with the mouth with strings. Into this they slipped the guinea pig, head first, and sat upon it. Amazing. "I'm glad I've seen that done," thought Alice. "I've so often read in the newspapers at the end of the trials, there was some attempt at applause, which was immediately suppressed by the other officers of the court, and I never understood what that meant till now. And if that's all you know about it, you may stand down." "I can't go any lower," said the Hatter. "I'm on the floor as it is." "Then you must sit down," the king replied. Here the other guinea pig cheered, and was suppressed. "Come on, that finishes the guinea pigs," thought Alice. "Now we shall get on better." "I'd rather finish my tea," said the Hatter with an anxious look at the Queen, who was reading the list of singers. "You may go," said the king, and the Hatter hurriedly left the court, without even waiting to put his shoes on. "And just take his head off outside," the Queen added, to one of the officers, but the Hatter was out of sight before the officer could get to the door. "Call the next witness," said the king. The next witness was the Duchess's cook. She carried the pepper box in her hand. Alice guessed who it was even before she got into the court. By the way, the people near her began sneezing all at once. "Give your evidence," said the king. "Shan't," said the cook. King looked anxiously at the White Rabbit, who said in a low voice, "Your Majesty must examine this witness." "Well, if I must, I must," said the king with a melancholy air, and after folding his arms and frowning at the cook until her eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice, "What are tarts made of?" "Pepper, mostly," said the cook. "Treacle," said a sleepy voice behind her. "Collar the Dormouse," the Queen shrieked out. "Behead the Dormouse! Turn the Dormouse out of court! Suppress him! Pinch him! Off with his whiskers!" For some minutes, the whole court was in confusion, getting the dormouse turned out, and by the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared. "Never mind," said the king, with an air of great relief. "Call the next witness." And he added, in an undertone to the queen, "Really, my dear, you must cross-examine the next witness. It quite makes my forehead ache." Alice watched the White Rabbit as he fumbled over the list, feeling very curious to see what the next witness would be like. "For they haven't got much evidence yet," she said to herself. Imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out the top of his shrill little voice the name Alice. "Oh, thank you, Shadow." "Will do." Unshrimped. So we'll read the next chapter, and then I will chat until we hit 4 o'clock, and then we'll rate Shira, who should be starting her second half of her third anniversary. Hooray! So yeah, that's the general plan. I knew that this was probably going to be shorter, but still, I'm glad. I wanted to finish something before the year ended. Alright. Excuse me for a minute. Alright. Let's do this thing. There we go. Chapter 12. Alice's Evidence. "Here," cried Alice, quite forgetting, in the flurry of the moment, how large she had grown in the last few minutes, and she jumped up in such a hurry that she tripped over the jury box with the edge of her skirt, upsetting all the jurymen on the heads of the crowd below. And there they lay, sprawled out about, reminding her very much of a globe of goldfish she had accidentally upset the week before. "You're not supposed to keep goldfish in those bowls. You're just supposed to keep them to display them. Then you're supposed to, put them in a more roomier place." "Oh, hello, kitty kitty." "Hello." "Oh, I beg your pardon," she exclaimed in a tone of great dismay, and began picking them up again as quickly as she could, for the accident of the goldfish kept running in her head. Are you gonna... Okay. And she had a vague sort of idea that they must be collected at once and put back into the jury box or they would die. "The trial cannot proceed," said the king, in a very grave voice, "until all the jurymen are back in their proper places. All," he repeated with great emphasis, looking hard at Alice as he said so. "Yes, hello." "Well, please do not sit on the keyboard. Thank you." And as I say that, yep, that is from Hazel. From Hazel. Cat interruption. Alice looked at the jury box and saw that in her haste she'd put the lizard in head downwards, and the poor little thing was waving its tail about in a melancholy way, being quite unable to move. She soon got it out again and put it right. Not that that signifies much, she said to herself. I should think it would be quite as much use in the trial one way up as the other. And soon the jury had little recovered from the shock of being upset, and their slates and pencils had been found and handed back to them, and they set to work very diligently to write out the history of the accident, all except the lizard, who seemed too much overcome to do anything but sit with its mouth open, gazing into the roof of the court. Yes, Hazel is the true author of this book. What do you know about this business? Asked the king to Alice. Nothing, said Alice. Nothing whatever, persisted the king. Nothing whatever, said Alice. That's very important, the king said, turning to the jury. They were just beginning to write this down on their slates when the white rabbit interrupted. Unimportant, your majesty means, of course, he said, in a very respectful tone, but frowning and making faces at him as he spoke. Unimportant, of course, I mean, the king hastily said as he went on to himself in an undertone. Important, unimportant, unimportant, important, as if he were trying which word sounded best. Some of the jury wrote it down, important, and some unimportant. Alice could see this, and as she was near enough to look at their slates, but it doesn't matter a bit, she thought to herself. At this moment the king, who had been of some time busily writing in his notebook, called out, Silence! And read from the book, Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high must leave the court. Everybody looked at Alice. I'm not a mile high, said Alice. You are, said the king. Nearly 2 miles high, added the queen. Well, I shan't go at any rate, said Alice. Besides, that's not a regular rule. You invented it just now. It's the oldest rule in the book, said the king. Then it ought to be number 1, said Alice. The king turned pale and shut his notebook hastily. Consider your verdict, he said to the jury in a low, trembling voice. There's more evidence to come yet, please, your majesty, said the white rabbit, jumping up in a great hurry. This paper had just been picked up. What's in it? Said the queen. I haven't opened it yet, said the white rabbit, but it seems like a letter written by the prisoner to somebody. It must have been that, said the king. Unless it was written to nobody, which isn't unusual, you know. Who's it directed to? Said one of the jurymen. It isn't directed at all, said the white rabbit. In fact, there's nothing written on the outside. He unfolded the paper as he spoke, and added, It isn't a letter after all. It's a set of verses. Are they in the prisoner's handwriting? Asked another juryman. No, they're not, said the white rabbit. And that's the queerest thing about it. The jury all looked puzzled. He must have imitated somebody else's hand, said the king. The jury brightened up at it again. Please, your majesty, said the knave. I didn't write it, and they can't prove that I did. There's no name signed at the end. If you didn't sign it, said the king, that only makes the matter worse. You must have meant some mischief, or else you would have signed your name like an honest man. There was a general clapping of hands at this. It was the first really clever thing the king had said that day. That proves his guilt, of course, said the king. So off with... It doesn't prove anything of the sort, said Alice. Why, you don't even know what they're about. Read them, said the king. The white rabbit put on his spectacles. Where shall I begin, please your majesty? Begin in the beginning, the king said very gravely, and go on till you come to the end, then stop. There was a dead silence in the court, and the White Rabbit read out these verses. They told me you had been to her, and mentioned me to him. She gave me a good character, but I said I could not swim. He sent them word that I had not gone. We know it to be true. If she should push the matter on, what would become of you? I gave her one, they gave him two. You gave us three or more. They returned from him to you, though they were mine before. If I or she should chance to be involved in this affair, you must trust to set them free, exactly as they were. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, the obstacle that came between him, ourselves, and it. Don't let him know she liked them best, for this must ever be a secret kept between the rest, between yourself and me. That's the most important piece of evidence we've heard yet, said the king, rubbing his hands. So let the jury, and if any one of them can explain it, said Alice. She'd grown so large in the last few minutes that she wasn't a bit afraid of interrupting them. I'll give him a sixpence. I don't believe there's an atom of meaning to it. The jury all wrote down on their slates, she doesn't believe there's an atom of meaning to it. But none of them attempted to explain the paper. If there's no meaning in it, said the king, that saves a world of trouble, you know. And we didn't try to find any. And yet, I don't know, he went on, spreading out the verses on his knee, and looked at them with one eye. I seem to see some meaning in them after all. Said I could not swim. You can't swim, can you? He said, turning over to the knave. The knave shook his head sadly. Do I look like it? He said, which he certainly did not, being made entirely of cardboard. All right, so far, said the king, as he went on muttering over the verses to himself. We know it to be true, and the jury, of course, if she should push the matter on, which must be the queen, what would become of you? What indeed? I gave her one, they gave him two. Why must it be that he did with the tarts, you know? But it goes on, they're all returned from him to you, said Alice. Why, they are they? Said the king, triumphantly, pointing to the tarts on the table. Nothing can be clearer than that. Then again, before she had the fit. You never had fits, my dear, I think, he said to the queen. Never, said the queen furiously, throwing an inkstand at the lizard as she spoke. The unfortunate little Bill had left off writing on his slate with one finger, and he found it to make no mark. But now he hastily began again, using the ink as it was trickling down his face as long as it lasted. Then the words don't fit you, said the king, looking round the court with a smile. There was a dead silence. It's a pun, the king added in an angry tone. Hold on. Yeah, okay. It's a pun, the king added in an angry tone, and everybody laughed. Let the jury consider their verdict, the king said for about the 12th time that day. No, no, said the queen. Sentences first, verdict afterwards. Stuff and nonsense, Alice said loudly. The idea of having the sentence first. Hold your tongue, said the queen, turning purple. I won't, said Alice. Off with her head, the queen shouted at the top of her voice. Nobody moved. Who cares for you? Said Alice. She had grown into her full size by this time. You're nothing but a pack of cards. At this, the whole pack rose up in the air and came flying down upon her, and she gave a little scream, half of fright and half of anger, and tried to beat them off, and she found them lying on the bank. She found herself lying on the bank, with her head in the lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some sort of dead leaf that had floated down from the tree upon her face. Wake up, Alice, dear, said her sister. Why, what a long sleep you've had. Oh, I've had such a curious dream, said Alice. And she told her sister, oh no. Oh, Ginternet. Silly, silly Ginternet. And she told her sister, as well as she could remember, them all these strange adventures of hers that you have just been reading about. And when she had finished, her sister kissed her and said, "It was a curious dream, dear, certainly. But now run into your tea. It's getting late." So Alice got up and ran off, thinking while she ran, as well as she might, what a wonderful dream it had been. But her sister sat still as she left, leaning her head on her hand, watching the setting sun and thinking of little Alice and all the wonderful adventures, till she too began dreaming after a fashion, and this was her dream. First she dreamed about little Alice herself. Once again, the tiny hands were clasped upon her knee, and the bright, eager eyes were looking up into hers, and she could hear the little tones of her voice and see the queer little toss of her head, and uh, kept back the wandering hair that would always get into her eyes. And still, as she listened, or seemed to listen, the whole place around her became alive with strange creatures of her little sister's dream. The long grass rustled at her feet, as the white rabbit, hurried by the frightened mouse, splashed his way through the neighboring pool, as she could hear the rattle of the teacups of the March Hare and his friends, as they shared their never-ending meal, and the shrill voice of the Queen, ordering the unfortunate guests to execution. Once more the pig baby was sneezing, on the Duchess's knee, while plates and dishes crashed around it. Once more the shriek of the griffin, and the squeaking of the lizard's slate pencil, and the choking of the suppressed guinea pigs, filled the air with the mix of distant sobs and of the miserable mock turtle. So she sat on, with her eyes closed, and half believed herself in Wonderland, though she knew she'd be open to them again, or she would open them again, and all would change, and reality would all change to the dull reality. The grass would only be rustling in the wind, and the pool rippling and waving of the reeds. The rattling teacups would be changed to the tinkling of sheep bells, and the Queen's shrill cries were the voice of the shepherd boy, and the sneeze of the baby, the shriek of the griffin, and all the other queer noises would change, she knew, to the confused clamor of the busy farmyard, which was lowing the cattle at the distance, or would take place of the mock turtle's heavy sobs. Lastly, she pictured herself and this same little sister of hers. She pictured to herself how this same little sister of hers would, in the time after, be herself a grown woman, and how she would keep, through all her riper years, the simple and loving heart of her childhood, and how she would gather about in her other little children, and make their eyes bright and eager, with many strange tales, perhaps even with the dream of Wonderland of long ago, and how she would fill with all the simple sorrows to find the pleasure in all their simple joys, remembering their own child life and happy summer days. The end. Yes, hello. Wow, that was almost exactly an hour. Nice. Well, that was certainly an experience. I hope you enjoyed. I know I tripped up on some of it, but oh well. It's still my reading. Yes, hello. All right. Well, I hope uh that everybody has a nice chill time before the new year happens, and I hope that the new year is good because yeah, this time can get a little bit hard for people. I know it's a little bit hard for me because my favorite time of year is the period between my birthday, and Christmas, because that's when a lot of activities are happening and people are always being kind, and it's just a lot of good things happen in those that month or so of time. And it's like, oh, that's over. And then the new year happens, and the new year takes a while to kind of get into swing. So, yeah, but I hope it's okay for everybody. And now let's see. Let's see if Cher's live. Oh, she is. She's yelling at fruit. Okay, so that is what we're gonna do. Thank you all for joining me. I know this was a shorter one, but I will see you next year. So we'll do story time raid. I hope everybody has a good rest of their day. Okay, I'll see you later.